DisruptHealth. I am your host, Julie Palumbo, and today we have a wonderful guest, Matt Dewar, who is the founder and president of Journey 30K. So I just want to welcome Matt. We're going to have a great conversation about mindfulness and how important it is to become a better and healthier person by integrating that into our daily routine. So welcome, Matt. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thanks for having me, Julie. Excited to chat.
So tell us more about Journey 30K.
Journey 30K is a wellness and mindfulness education platform that I developed out of a lot of the work that I've been doing as an educator over the last 15 years. And the significance of Journey 30K, people always ask if it's a running company to help people run further. The 30K is for 30,000, and the average person lives 30,000 days. Wow. So Journey 30K is the journey of your life, and to what end, to what destination are you hoping to go in that time? And so that's kind of the philosophical framework of the company.
I love that. That's a really great way of looking at life too, to think, okay, I have 30,000 days. What am I going to make out of them?
Yeah. I do this exercise with my students. I'm also a high school teacher, where I introduce this idea of 30,000 days to them. I say, I want you to imagine a jar with 30,000 pebbles in it. And I said, this morning when you woke up and you cursed your alarm on your phone, you were in the process of pulling a pebble out of the jar of your life that you'll never be able to put back.
Yeah.
And when you see it at that scale, you start to more fully appreciate the fact that time is your most valuable resource. Mm-hmm. And often we just, we assume that it's inexhaustible. And so just imagining pulling those pebbles out of the jar can be a valuable reflection for being more purposeful for what you're doing and how you live your life.
Exactly. So going along with that and, being purposeful and mindful with everything that we do, I'm a huge advocate of doing that and really being present every day as to what we do, because as you said, time is so valuable. I like to say we can't roll over unused minutes into the next day. We can't create more time. No matter who we are, we all have 24 hours in a day, and that's it. So going back to the mindfulness aspect of it, why are you so interested in mindfulness, and what got you so interested in mindfulness?
So the title of Journey 30K and my interest in mindfulness kind of go hand in hand. When I was a junior in high school, my grandfather was sick with cancer, and he actually stayed with us the last couple months of his life. And I saw for the first time, I was old enough to process the implications of losing someone you care about at that time. I'd lost a grandparent prior to that, but I was so young it didn't really register. And so I was a junior in high school, and I was just kind of primed for looking at life in a different way. And in living with him in his final days, he expressed lots of regret in his life. Mm-hmm. And that he had mishandled his time. And it got me more interested in myself, my identity, who I was, and what I wanted to do with my life. And then shortly after he passed away, I met a Zen Buddhist monk from Korea. That's a whole nother story that would take a long time. It's pretty random. And so I had actually recently read a Zen book. This is all very synchronistic, how this all played out. And I saw him and I said, "Are you a Zen Buddhist monk?" And he said, yes, I am. And so we started talking, and he invited me to a Zen center that had just opened up, and he had just come from Korea to help open it up. So I started going like almost every day after school, my senior year of high school. and he taught me how to meditate. We would talk philosophy. He had a degree in philosophy as well. And that inspired me. Later on in college, I went on to major in religion and philosophy, double major in religion and philosophy. And so I brought him to school to give talks about meditation and stuff. He was like my show and tell monk. And he loved it. I loved it. The school loved it. And then finally, towards the end of my senior year, he said that he had spoken with the head teacher in Korea, and he had expressed that I was really sincere about learning about all of this stuff. And so the head teacher said that I had an open invitation to come study in any monastery in Korea that I wanted to.
Wow.
I just needed to get there. So I went home and told my parents, I don't want to go to college. I want to go live with Buddhist monks. We all know how that went over, right? And so, long story short, in the middle of my sophomore year of college, I basically walked out of a class, down to the registrar, said, I'm out. And she said, well, why are you doing this? And I said, because I want to go live with Buddhist monks. And she looked at me like I was crazy. And I came home, got on a plane, and went to Korea for about 4.5 months.
Wow.
And lived kind of the monastic life. I had an open-ended ticket where you could come back anytime within a year.
Okay.
But after 4.5 months, I had my fill. And so then I came back home, went back to school, continued to pursue it. And then after graduating, I went on to get a master's and doctorate in education, and have been certified to teach mindfulness in schools, and have implemented a mindfulness program in the district where I work. I'm the well-being coordinator for our district. And then now I do it all over the place for schools all over, helping them develop mindfulness programs, even just helping teachers as a part of their professional development, learn how to slow down, relax, take care of themselves, which are becoming increasingly invaluable skills. And so that's kind of my, the shortened version of my path to mindfulness.
That's awesome. And what have you seen with mindfulness? How has it affected your life or changed your life, as well as those that you work with? What kind of impacts has it had?
That's a really good question. For me personally, by nature, I'm about the least mindful person. Every teacher I had from kindergarten through basically all of high school asked my parents, will you please put this kid on medication? I was held back in kindergarten because I was uncontrollable. I was just so hyper. And then my sophomore year of high school, I transferred schools and I had to repeat my sophomore year because my grades were awful. Mm-hmm. Because I couldn't sit still. Wow. And luckily I excelled in sports. And so that kind of gave me something to hang my identity on. But in terms of academically in school, I was just so hyper. I had so much energy. Mm-hmm. And mindfulness is, and I mean, it's been about 20 years of doing it. It has allowed me to slow down, and live life frame by frame versus just jumping from A to Z. Mm-hmm. And it's not an easy practice, and we can talk about that in a few minutes, but it's not an easy practice. There's never a shortage of excuses why you should be doing something else other than practicing. As I say to my students, I've never once gone to practice and not had thoughts pulling me away from doing it, saying I could be doing something more productive with my time or whatever. But in spite of that, 20 years of that, there's a value there that's so important that I've continued to do it basically daily for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so it is transformative. And the students who I work with and colleagues who I work with, I think those who actually commit to it, even if it's 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, just to start, it doesn't take long to see that there's something pretty profound that happens when we pay attention to our experience. And yeah, I mean, and the research in the last 10 years with fMRI imaging, and a lot of the work that Richard Davidson's doing at University of Wisconsin and John Kabat-Zinn at University of Massachusetts. I mean, there's just a lot of substantial research now just verifying what has been kind of experientially felt and known for over 2,000 years. So
that's wonderful. And, there's so many ways that mindfulness could be interpreted by many people across the spectrum. So what does mindfulness mean to you?
To me, and I don't offer this as I'm not suggesting that this is the definition it should be for everyone. So to answer your question directly, for me, it is, if you look at the word itself, it's a derivative, it's an etymological derivative of a Sanskrit word and a Pali word that means to remember. And I think that's really revealing when you understand where a word comes from, because it reveals a power to the word that might get lost in time. And so mindfulness is remembering. It means it's the practice of remembering to come back to your life. Because we so easily drift. There's a wonderful passage by Søren Kierkegaard, who's a Danish philosopher, might be one of my top 3 favorite passages in Western philosophy. And I'm going to paraphrase it to make it more modern, but he says, the greatest hazard in life is losing yourself, because it's not like losing your car keys or your cell phone or something like that, some object, because you can go your whole life without realizing you've lost yourself. And so I see mindfulness as being the practice of preventing drift in your life. We so easily drift, and we have unprecedented levels of distraction with technology. And I say this to my students, never before has it really been so possible to go your entire life in a distracted state. And we have the ability to do that today, to be completely preoccupied, with everything but our life now. And so personally, I see mindfulness as being the practice of remembering to come back to home base, which is right where your feet are, right where your breath is rising and falling, right where sounds are rising and falling, and just settling into that space, and that there's something deeply rewarding about being able to persist in that space.
Absolutely. And to go back to your example about, if you had 30,000 pebbles, it's kind of like taking that pebble and almost like cherishing it, and not just going like one after the other, throwing them away. Like you're actually spending time with it. So you're being present in your day and, not hurrying to move on to the next one so quickly.
Yeah. We get in the habit, because we're an automatic pilot, of wishing our time away. That we can't wait for the weekend. We can't wait for some life event to happen. We can't wait for, a new job, whatever. But at some point, we're going to wish we had the time we wished away.
Yeah.
And we so effortlessly wish that time away. And that wishing away is grounded in an ignorance. And so, again, mindfulness being this practice of remembering what is true, that we are pulling pebbles out and that they're not being replaced as we pull them out. And that illuminates the value of each one all the more.
Exactly. That's wonderful. I totally believe in cherishing every moment. I never use the words, I can't wait until, because I know I'm going to look back and say, well, I wish I had that time again. So I'm so into savoring the moment. I don't believe on wishing away into the weekends or anything. You know, every day could be amazing. It's what you make of it. So I always say a Monday could very likely be better than a Friday if you make it that way. So
Yeah.
I love that idea of just being present and really enjoying what you're experiencing in the moment rather than kind of glossing over it into the next big moment that you're waiting for. And, you know, a lot of it is kind of rooted in meditation. And I wanted to bring that up because I know personally it has changed my life, meditating just a few minutes a day. So what can you tell our viewers about meditating, and what's kind of one way that they could start implementing this mindfulness or meditation on their own, like within their own lifestyle, their own routine?
Wow, that's a big question. It's a phenomenal question. I think the first thing I communicate usually is the best is the enemy of the good. And I think when it comes to self-development, people create the best version, and then when they cannot immediately attain it, it's like, why try? And I think that's a very defeating framework. What I think is a better framework for approaching behavior change and practicing mindfulness would be a behavior change. It would be implementing something new, is to do what you know you can do, and then to build momentum, because momentum is everything. I sometimes with my students say, think about a freight train just starting motion. How much force has to be generated into just moving an inch?
Yeah.
But once you initiate that movement and you start building momentum, it has a power in itself, and it makes that forward movement easier and easier and easier. And so it's that momentum that's so key, and it starts with small steps. So one thing that someone can do to start a mindfulness practice is simply journal about what are the handful of thoughts you live with on a daily basis. And we typically think of, I mean, we think thousands of thoughts a day. And so we think, oh, how could I keep track of that? Well, those thousands of thoughts are really just incarnations of a handful of fundamental kind of archetypal thoughts that we have about ourselves and about reality. They're assumptions. I sometimes use the example, Michael Pollan. Have you heard of Michael Pollan?
Yep.
Omnivore's Dilemma.
Yes.
That's another conversation. That book is wonderful, but
that's our next episode.
Right. He talks about how you walk into a grocery store and you think you're walking into this just rich diversity of food, but in reality, it's all corn, soy, wheat, and that's basically like 90% of it.
Yep.
And thinking is the same way. Our thoughts are packaged in so many different forms, but if you really pay attention, you'll see that there's just a handful of thoughts that are the basic ingredients for all the other versions and packages of thinking. And so one mindful exercise is just to start paying attention to the thoughts you're kind of married to. And then once you can start to identify them, what are the type of feeling tones and feeling states that arise as a result of you believing in them? And not to oversimplify things, but I think two basic kind of species of thought are thoughts that narrow and thoughts that open. And typically lower brain associated negative thinking narrows. It narrows our experience. It narrows what we think is possible in ourselves.
Yep.
And there are other thoughts that are life affirming, that open up possibilities, that create a sense of freedom and spaciousness within ourselves. And so just that exercise of looking at the thought, how it manifests as a feeling. And then the third part is the behaviors that are driven as a result. We have a thought, we believe it's true. We have a feeling state that then reinforces the belief that it's true. It's like virtual reality. We live it. And then as a result of living it, we then conduct ourselves accordingly. And we seek out behaviors, we enact it, we play it out in the world. And that can be really self-destructive if our basic thought assumptions are inaccurate. So that's one exercise. But in terms of a formal mindfulness practice, just finding a quiet place in your home or your dorm room or your office or wherever. To me, it doesn't matter how you sit in any way, in a chair, sit with your legs crossed, do whatever, just as long as you have a vertically organized spine, because a straight spine is an alert mind. We pay our best attention with a straight spine. That's why when we get scared, we sit up instinctively. So there's a neurological correlation there. We're cueing our neurology to pay attention. And then simply start by, I have clients and students sometimes take their hand and just put it on their abdomen and just simply notice that sensation of rising and falling. And if that is not vivid enough, some people's minds are so distractible that they need something more to do, then you can, in addition to the hand, you can just count your exhalations. Right? And I would say for 5 minutes, start with 5 minutes, and you'll see very quickly that simple is not easy when it comes to attention. And that we have a way habitually of making simple things very complex. And so you'll see that your mind wanders off. It creates all sorts of storylines and associations. And as soon as you notice that your mind has left the hand or the counting, gently bring your attention back to the hand, back to the breath, back to the sensations of the body, and just do that over and over again in a 5 minute period. And if you have to do that 50 times, that's awesome. Not to belittle the practice, but it's almost like going to the gym. In some ways, I hate this analogy, but whatever, I'm going to use it. If you're doing bicep curls, right, and you've never done them before, it's going to be lightweight and a lot of reps. And as you get stronger, there's more weight and fewer reps. And I think attention in some ways operates like a muscle. Where the more you train it, the more you work it, the more conditioned it becomes to stay in the present.
Yeah. I think that's a great analogy, and it's something that people could really tangibly, grasp their mind around, to correlating the gym workout with mindfulness. And you made a great point about, if you start to drift off, just come back into your breath. And isn't there a saying that, if you don't have 5 minutes to meditate, then you should meditate for like 20 minutes, because that means your life is just so crazy that that means you have to do it longer. And I always between 5 and 10 minutes. And sometimes it's a great way to kind of, not just bring yourself back to where you are, but it makes things easier to manage then afterwards. If you are feeling overwhelmed, or at least if I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I take that time to almost pause and gather myself, it tends to allow everything else to go a little more smoothly and in a better direction than it would have been had I just been going through the motions and done things through instinct. So sometimes we have to pause in order to continue in a more positive way. And I thank you so much for walking us through that, because I know when I started, it is a little intimidating if you don't really know how to start. And I used to associate meditation with yoga, and I thought, I had to do a whole hour of it. But just doing 5 minutes could really lead to a big impact, and then kind of growing from there, as you have said, could be really impactful for our viewers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we wrap up, I wanted to ask, is there anything that we kind of have to be careful about with mindfulness? Is there anything else that maybe we should know that you didn't cover, that we should just be careful about?
Yeah. Mindfulness is a very old practice that really is transformative and beneficial. We live in a very reductive culture that likes to pull things out of context. This whole idea of optimizing or hacking, and mindfulness is just the latest example in a just a long list of things that people are trying to hack for money and for self-improvement. And I think it's important that you have to authentically approach the process and the practice. And you have to be willing to sacrifice something, and that not attending to yourself for years and years and years means that when you finally stop to pay attention to what's actually going on, that can be really uncomfortable. And so if mindfulness is being sold to you as this panacea, this immediate trick that's going to cure all your problems and help you relax and whatever, don't buy it. It's on the front end, it might actually be a little destabilizing. It might be a little uncomfortable, might be a lot uncomfortable. And that's a part of the process. But ultimately what you're cultivating and developing and working toward is worth that sacrifice. And I think it's really important to remember that this is it, that it's a process. It's not a trick. Okay. And I see that just more and more. They call it McMindfulness. And I think people should be aware of McMindfulness and be cautious.
I love that. And thank you for sharing that. I think it is, especially in this day and age, we want everything right now. We want everything to just be a magic pill to make our lives better, to make us feel better, make us look better, anything. We just want it immediately. And this takes some time. And it's worth it, though, at the end of the day, when you're 10 pebbles later, when you're mindfully, you're mastering the mindfulness, I think you will be in much better shape. And it is an accomplishment. That's definitely a component of it, that it's an accomplishment to get through this. Yeah. It's a commitment to yourself. Being committed to yourself is an accomplishment. Yeah. Exactly. Well, Matt, thank you so much for being here. I learned so much more about mindfulness than I ever thought. I thought I was an expert on it, but clearly there are so many different ways of looking at it. I love the idea of Journey 30K. I think that's so inspirational. And I'm definitely going to keep those 30,000 pebbles in my mind now as a visual as I go through the days and reset my alarm tomorrow. And I hope all of you enjoyed our session on mindfulness. And this is another episode of Disrupt Health. I am Julie Palumbo, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.